And now we'll resume our discussion into chapter number 9 onwards. In fact, this chapter number 9, it comes right in the middle of the Bhagavad Gita, and very, very important chapter. In fact, we're going to devote 2 sessions today and tomorrow to understand chapter number 9. So let's begin with the invocatory prayers. Joining your palms together. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namo Vishnupadaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swaminiti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare, Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So welcome back to our discussion of chapter number 9 of the Bhagavad Gita. So very quickly, let me set up the whiteboard for us. And so we begin our discussion of chapter number 9, which is called as Raja Vidya Rajaguhya Yoga. Raja Vidya Raja Guhya Yoga. So what is this word? The word Raja means the king, right? And Vidya means knowledge. So the king of all knowledge, which is the topmost knowledge, is something that will be revealed in this particular chapter. Likewise, again, the word Raja Guhya, Guhya means a confidential knowledge, like a secret, right? So the king of all secrets, or the top secret, is also going to be revealed in this chapter. That is why, like I said, this is a very, very important chapter, because that knowledge which is not so easily available in the Vedas is going to be revealed in this particular chapter. And likewise, that knowledge which is so confidentially kept within the broader gamut of Vedic texts, that is going to be revealed in this particular chapter, right? So specifically, the reason why we are going to have 2 sessions for this chapter is, in today's session, we are going to talk specifically about the Raja Vidya aspect. What is it? King of all knowledge among all the various things. So if you remember, so far in the Bhagavad Gita, we studied about the science of soul. We studied about what action is, what karma is. We studied about what is this knowledge of action is, this jnana aspect. We studied something about the methods of controlling the mind, something about Ashtanga Yoga, right? We even studied in the 7th chapter about Krishna and some of his energies, right? So we studied so many aspects. We studied literally about matter, spirit, and control of both. If you remember, we discussed that in 7th chapter. We studied about all of that. But now, in this specific chapter, we are trying to take our understanding even more deeper. And that is why this is the Raja Vidya. This is the king of all knowledge, right? And once you understand the king of this knowledge, then the top secret will be revealed. That is something we'll elaborate more in tomorrow's discussion, right? So how does this specific chapter begin? So in this chapter, from text number, so even before we go there, if you remember, going back to our definition of Buddhi Yoga, because we just had a long break, so good to revise what happened in the past. So Buddhi Yoga, how did we define? We defined Buddhi Yoga as karma or karma yoga, which is done on a strong platform of Jnana Yoga, right? And with a mood and intention of devotion, right? And specifically within that, with the devotional understanding, we said we had 3 levels of devotional understanding, right? The first level was where one tries to remember the Lord with intellectual conviction, and we use the term as where there is devotion that is mixed with knowledge, or Jnana Mishra Bhakti. Then somebody can try to remember the Lord through meditative absorption, so this intellectual conviction part is something that we studied in chapter number 7, and meditative absorption is something that we studied in chapter number 8. And now today we are going to talk about, or this chapter is going to talk about, how to completely absorb one's consciousness, how to become completely aware of the Lord in the state of loving devotion. And that is a path of exclusive devotion, or ananya bhakti. The word ananya, anya means others, ananya means nothing others, which means very exclusive. The process of exclusive devotion is a theme that will be highlighted in this specific chapter, right? And that is why this is the heart of the Bhagavad Gita. If the middle 6 chapters, if you remember last time I discussed, is the heart of the Bhagavad Gita, the heart of the heart is, or literally the soul of the Bhagavad Gita is this chapter. In fact, especially the second half of this chapter and the first half of the next chapter, that is where the essence of Bhagavad Gita will be brought out. So that is a theme. So we went through this whole discussion of, in the 3rd chapter we discussed Karma Yoga, in the 4th chapter we discussed Jnana Yoga, right? Here was chapter 3, here was chapter 4. Then the integration of how karma and jnana is to happen is something discussed in chapter number 5. And then how in chapter number 6, how to strengthen the mind so that one can become the best yogi. Who is the best yogi? One who's always thinking of Krishna. So to think of Krishna first, our mind should become steady. So how do I steady my mind? That is something we discussed in chapter 6 and 7, 8, 9 respectively, about how do I actually remember Krishna? Now that I have a steady mind, how do I actually remember Krishna? That we discussed in 7, 8 chapters. And now continuing with that theme, where now the practitioner is no more relying merely on one's intellectual conviction, nor is he relying on one's own ability to meditate, because the strong mind. And Ashtanga Yogi has a very, very strong controlled mind, but not even the strength of one's mental control, but rather this is the yoga of the heart. And this yoga of the heart is where, because ultimately where our heart is, that is where our consciousness goes. Whatever is our most dominant desire, whatever is our most dominant longing, right? When I use the word heart, what do we mean by the heart? Heart is the aggregate of all the consciousness, right? And within that consciousness is the soul's desire. And when one exclusively desires for the Lord, right, and that exclusive desire is what we refer to as love. And when that love is directed towards that Lord, then the consciousness very naturally flows towards the Lord, which, or in other words, one only exclusively remembers the Lord, right? And that advanced science is something that will be elaborated in this 9th chapter, right? So let's see how this 9th chapter progresses. Right? So the 9th chapter, from text number 1 through 10, it talks about what is called as Bhagavat Aishwarya Jnana. Bhagavat Aishwarya Jnana. Right? Meaning, Bhagavat here means Lord's, Aishwarya Jnana. Aishwarya here means his mystical opulences. So knowledge about Lord's mystical powers. The Lord's mystical powers is going to be the theme. In fact, this is the king of all knowledge. To really understand Krishna in full, we have to understand even the transcendental aspect of Krishna, the mystical aspect of Krishna, right? Something that has not been very elaborated in detail so far in the Bhagavad Gita. That is what makes this particular chapter so special. However, not everybody can understand this mystical aspect. There is a specific qualification needed, right? The specific qualification needed to understand this. So what is that? That is going to be the main theme as this chapter begins. So Krishna begins this chapter by actually glorifying this knowledge, right? First he says, Idam tute guhyatamam pravakshami anusuyave. So what is the qualification needed for one to really understand this knowledge is anusuyave. One should be non-envious of Krishna. One should be non-envious of Krishna. Now, you may be wondering, what does it mean to envy Krishna? Right? Do we envy Krishna at all? Well, it's a very very subtle thing. Every time we make our ego as the center of our interactions, we are very subtly showing our envy towards Krishna, right? Because in its truest sense, as we saw in some of our previous discussions, right, especially in chapter number 5, when an advanced devotee, when he goes through this whole progression of tolerance, equanimity, and acceptance, and then the stage of acceptance comes, born out of humility, what happens to such a person? He understands that actually Krishna, he is the real master, he is the real enjoyer, and that Krishna is also my ultimate beneficiary, he is my best friend, right? And that gives one the ability to accept the reversals of life, right? So basically, when one is humble, this level of acceptance comes. But when that humility is missing, then when the ego comes up, we start making ourselves as a center of all interactions of life. And that is a kind of a subtle way of expressing our envy towards Krishna, right? So now at this point, some of you may be thinking, oh, does it mean to really understand this chapter, I have to become 100% humble, or I have to 100% give up my envy towards Krishna? Well, no, but even if you are aware of the problem, you have half solved the problem, right? So at least at this point, a very advanced devotee may give up their complete envy towards Krishna, but as beginners, as seekers like us, at least theoretically, if we understand Krishna as the master, Krishna as a controller, or Krishna as our best friend, even theoretically, if you understand, we are in the right direction where we are trying to be non-envious of Krishna, right? That is why Krishna says, because Arjuna, you are non-envious of me, I am giving you this specific knowledge, right? And then he says, what is the specialty of this knowledge? Not only I'm just giving you some theoretical knowledge, I'm also going to give an experience of this. This is a very experiential knowledge, right? We're going to talk about the glories of this knowledge, right? This is not just theory, but it's an experience. And this is a very, very important aspect for us to understand. Many times we think spiritual wisdom is something that you gain by reading books. But no, what you gain by reading books is just the framework of that wisdom. But for that wisdom to dawn upon us, we have to go through a certain experience. In fact, anything valuable in life, if you really want, when you internalize any kind of a learning in life, it comes when you experience it, right? It does not come just by knowing about something. Knowing and experiencing are two separate things. And that is the speciality of this knowledge. Krishna says, not only I am going to give you just some information about it, but rather I am going to give you an experience of what it means to realize that knowledge, right? And that is what is a specialty of this chapter. In fact, even today, right, the deeper experiences are going to come in tomorrow's part. But even in today's class, by the end of today's class, we are all going to experience something very deep, right? So stay prepared for a very wonderful experience today, right? And Krishna goes on in the second verse, talk about the glories of this knowledge. He says, this is Raja Vidya. This is the king of all knowledge. Raja Guhyam. This is the most confidential knowledge. Pavitram. This is extremely pure, right? This knowledge, it is purest knowledge in the sense that it is not tinged by any modes of material nature of sattva, rajas, and tamas. That is how pure this knowledge is. Pavitram idam uttamam. Uttamam also here means the topmost knowledge. And the best part is, this knowledge, as I mentioned earlier, can be experienced. Pratyaksha avagamam. Pratyaksha means, I can directly perceive it, right? You don't have to rely. If you remember, in the previous two chapters, especially chapter number 7, we read many things. Krishna as a taste of water, as a heat of light, as a heat of fire, as sun and the moon, right? Now they are good, right? When every time you look at the sun and the moon, it is good to see that, okay, the sun and moon are indirectly connected to Krishna. It is Krishna's warmth which I'm receiving. It is that Krishna's taste. It is Krishna's blessing in the form of his taste in water that I'm tasting. This is a very intellectual way of looking at things, right? But in this specific chapter, it's no more just an intellectual paradigm, but rather pratyaksha avagamam. We can directly perceive it. And that is what makes this chapter so special. Because ultimately, each and every one of us, what is lacking in our journey of spirituality is that experience. The moment you taste it, moment you directly experience that wisdom, then you will no more have any doubts. That is the speciality of this chapter, right? Therefore, you understand how powerful a chapter this is. And even some of the very, very abstract concepts we thought are very abstract, when you properly understand it and experience it, you will see, oh, they no more sound so abstract. They no more sound so strange. I no more have to just rely based on my intellectual conviction, but now I can directly experience it. Next time, when I am put in that situation, I can actually feel it. I can actually see it. I can actually perceive it and experience it. That is what this particular chapter is going to talk about. Pratyaksha avagamam dharmyam. And now you may say, oh, if it is indeed such a powerful, such a deep experience, I'm sure this chapter must be a difficult chapter. And Krishna says, no, susukham kartum avyayam. This chapter, this particular path which this chapter is giving, susukham kartum, one can very blissfully do it. In fact, susukham means the highest bliss. One can perform this particular practice with the highest bliss. Right? That is what makes this chapter so special, because it's going to give a very, very powerful experiential understanding of Krishna. Right? And then he says, however, he also gives if this is the qualification of one who is non-envious of Krishna, right? But if one carries that envy towards Krishna, what happens? Ashraddhadhana purusha dharmasya parantapa aprapya mam nivartante mrityu samsara vartmani. That those who are not faithful, those who do not have this kind of a spiritual conviction or shraddha, who have not gone through this experience because of their own envy in the heart, for such people, this particular chapter will never be understood, right? And that because of which their mind cannot fix on me, because of which they cannot attain the higher state. Therefore, they have to come back in this whole cycle of birth and death, right? That is the speciality of this particular chapter, right? So now, what exactly is this king of all knowledge, right? Because it is directly knowledge about Krishna, right? So we'll try to understand now what is that special knowledge. So in text number 4 and 5, Krishna is going to elaborate on this special knowledge, right? And two very, very interesting and little contradictory verses, right? This is what Krishna says: Maya tadam idam sarvam jagat avyakta murtina matsthani sarvabhutani na chaham teshu avasthita. Right? So what does he say? Maya tadam idam sarvam. By me, in my unmanifested form, this entire universe is pervaded. So basically, Krishna is present in this entire universe, right? In his unmanifested form, avyakta murti, unmanifested form, right? And he says, all beings are in me. And then he says, all beings are in me. Because if he is indeed pervading everywhere, right? If he is literally present everywhere, then all beings are in me. Then naturally, all beings are in me. And yet, Krishna says, I am not in them. I am not in them. Right? And then the next verse, again, Krishna says something even very strange. He says, Nachamasthani bhutani pashyame yogamaishwaram. Next verse in text number 5, this is all text number 4. And then suddenly in text number 5, Krishna says, Nachamasthani bhutani, that yet everything that is created does not rest in me. He says, everything is not in me. So if you look carefully, in the previous verse, he said, everything is in me, all beings are in me. And now he's saying, everything is not in me. So there's a very clear contradiction that Krishna is presenting here, right? So what does it mean? And then he says, this is because of my Pashyame Yoga Maishwaram. This is my mystical yoga, right? This is my, behold my mystical opulence. This is Krishna's mystical power, where how he can be in this creation and yet he can be aloof from it. Literally, if I may, elaborate, if I may paraphrase this, literally we can write it like this: Krishna is blank and Krishna is not blank, right? So literally now you can put anything in this blank and that is the statement is true. Krishna is in this creation, Krishna is not in this creation. Krishna is the creation, Krishna is not the creation. Krishna is, say for example, the sun and the moon. Krishna is simultaneously, he is not sun and the moon. This is the inconceivable, you can say some kind of an ambiguous nature about Krishna, that how two apparent opposites can simultaneously be true in him. And this is the Rajavidya. This is the king of knowledge. So to understand this, we are going to do a very interesting case study now, a very interesting a Vedic puzzle sort of a thing. We are going to understand this, right? So to understand this, we are going to combine some modern scientific concept and also some Vedic concepts in this regard. So there is a concept in modern science. Let's keep this area here. There is a concept in modern science called as the principle of time dilation. Time dilation. What does this principle of time dilation mean? So according to modern science, time is not a constant parameter. In fact, what we think, because right now, first of all, our whole understanding of time itself is a very, very misunderstood concept. Time is not what you see of the clock. That is just a measurement of time. But literally, time is that, imperceptible energy which is running all around us, which is causing things to move, causing things to tick, right? That is what this time is. And time is what that creates a perception of a continuity of experiences. That is what exactly time is doing to us. Time is affecting our consciousness by creating a series of experiences called as past, present, and future. That is how time operates, right, in these three domains. And many of us, we think that, okay, time is just one continuous linear phenomena, right? But it's not, its speed is not the same, which means that how a particular person perceives time need not be the same throughout the universe, right? This is the concept even modern science is talking about now, by talking about the phenomenon of time dilation. Basically, this, in those of you interested in physics, you can understand this from Einstein's theories of relativity. A product of that is this principle of time dilation. Basically, what this concept says is that how the experience of time is not the same throughout this universe. There are factors like the speed of an object, its proximity to a high gravity object. The more far away it is from Earth, for example, the time effect of time increases. When you're closer to a high gravity things, time slows down for you. So these are all the various concepts. In fact, there's a whole interesting phenomena called as the twin paradox. Maybe those of you are interested, you can actually Google for this. This is called the twin paradox, right? Now, basically what this says is that imagine there are two twins. One twin stays on Earth and the other twin takes a high-speed rocket to Jupiter and comes back, right? And say a journey to Jupiter and back, say, lasts about 50 years. So while the person on Earth ages for 50 years, the person who has traveled really fast and gone back and come back, the influence of time on them is very slow because they're traveling fast. So while twin A ages only 50 years, twin B, right, let me write this down. While twin A, say, ages 50 years, twin B literally ages only half of that, say 25 years, because of the high. And it is not that, things are any different for them. For them, life seems like it is going on normally. But when they actually meet again, they will see that because this person who has traveled in the rocket traveled at a very fast speed and has again come back after a long time, the influence of time on them slows down because of the high speed, right? Now, for those of you who are more well versed with the Vedic stories, some of you might have heard the story of Aghasura. In Krishna Lila, in the 10th canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, it is described the story of Aghasur was something that that the residents of Vrindavan got to know only after 1 year. That is how Sukadeva Goswami talks about it. Because what would happen every day in Vrindavan is that every time Krishna would have some amazing pastime, immediately the cowherd boys who were there with Krishna, all his friends, they would go home and tell, Mama, what happened today? Krishna had, fought with this demon, and this is how the fight went on. They would do very nice details of this whole and that entire pastime of Krishna. But this vanquishing of Aghasur was only known to people after 1 year. So when Sukadeva Goswami, the speaker of Bhagavatam, when he was narrating this, immediately Parikshit Maharaj, he has a doubt. How is it that it took them 1 year to narrate this story? So then in that regard, it's a long story cut short. What happens is when this whole Aghasur was killed, the celebration of Aghasur went all over the universe. And the topmost planet of this universe, where Brahmaji resides, when he heard, hey, everybody is glorifying that blue boy on earth as God, as the supreme absolute truth, not just God, but as supreme absolute truth, right? Is he really that absolute truth? Let me go and test him. So just to test Krishna, Brahmaji descends to earthly planet, because Brahmaji lives in a totally different dimension, right? and when he descends from his dimension to the earthly dimension, and he kidnaps Krishna's friends and takes them to his world for a fraction of a second, literally for 1/10 of a second. And that 1/10 of a second, 1 year transpired on earth, indicating that there was a difference in the time frame of Brahmaji's planetary system and the earthly planetary system, or the Brahmaji's dimension and earthly dimension. They are operating in different time zones, as you know, or time speeds, right? Not just time zones, but different time speeds, right? And everybody in the audience understood that, because everybody in the audience actually knew the concept of time dilation. In fact, there are so many Vedic stories that elaborate on this principle of time dilation. But using that, we are going to do a very interesting case study, right? So imagine a hypothetical scenario where now, so remember I spoke about different planetary systems, right? So here we are, we have so many planetary systems. So the lower one, the lowest one is the earthly planetary system. Then we have few more. Okay, there you go. So the lower planetary system, which is called as Bhu or Bhu Loka. Loka means the dimension of the planetary system, right? Which is earthly planet. Bhu means here earth. Then this is actually described. The Vedic cosmology explains how the entire universe is divided into multiple dimensions, into 14 specific dimensions. Our earthly plane is on number 7 of this list. Then 2 layers above us, or 2 dimensions above us, is the planetary system called as Swarga, which is also referred to as the heaven. Then the topmost planetary system is the 14th planetary system, which is called as Satyaloka. Right? This is where Brahmaji also resides, or Brahmaloka, etc. So it talks about these different dimensions and different, and what makes this dimension so interesting is that, as I said, the influence of time is very different. For example, if you are in a heavenly dimension, there 1 day, which means there 24 hours, right? 12 days in the day and 12 days of the night, 12 hours in the day and 12 hours of the night. There 24 hours, it translates to about 1 whole year on earth, or 1 earth years. And likewise, if you go to a higher planetary system like say Satyaloka or Brahmaloka, things get even more difficult. There 1/10 of a second, translates to 1 whole earth year. And that's what happened in that story that I told you earlier. Brahmaji, just for 1/10 of a second, he kidnapped the boys and came back, and in that 1 year transpired on earth. Right? That is how the time zones operate, time dilation operates. Right? And of course, beyond this whole worldly limitation, right? If this is the limit of the outer universe, right? Beyond that lies the spiritual world, where literally 1 moment is the whole of eternity, infinite time on earth, right? Because it is said that time, the very concept of time is absent there, in meaning that 1 moment there literally translates into the infinite. That is a timeless world. That's what timeless reality means, right? And this concept will be a little clear a little later in the discussion. So this would be the Vaikunta, or the spiritual planets, or Goloka, it operates in this particular kind of a time frame, right? So now, so we are going to do an interesting case study where we are going to perform and observe an activity across these different time zones, right? So imagine there's a football match happening on Earth, a typical football match, which usually lasts for about 90 minutes. But for ease of our calculations, we are going to say that the match lasts for 1 hour, right? So you go to the stadium, you watch that football match, you come back. How much time did you spend? You spend 1 hour on earth, because 1 hour is all that happened on earth. So life is simple. That's how we lead our life, right? So now something interesting is going to happen. Now people in Swargaloka also end up playing football, right? And now imagine you have some kind of a means by which you can observe this match right here on earth as a live transmission. I repeat. So here they are playing their 1 hour match. They are playing their 1 hour match on, and you are trying to, you say you have some kind of a strange advanced technology by which you can watch live transmission of something that is happening in the heavenly planets, right? You have the ability to do that by some kind of a device. For example, imagine you have some kind of a mobile gadget, and using that gadget you are able to see live transmission of what is happening in the heavenly planet. Now, how will that live transmission look like, right? That is something that I want you to think about, because you see, the people over there, for them life is happening as normal, as like how you and I are talking, things are all normal for us. Life for them is also happening normal. They are playing their football match in a normal way, but there's a difference in the way that time, the kala chakras, the time dimensions operate. So because their 24 hours lasts 1 year on earth, their 24 hours lasts 1 year on earth. Or if I were to write this in a more simpler way, their 24 hours last 12 months on earth, right? Which means if their 24 hours last 12 months, then their 1 hour lasts about half a month, right? So half a month is about 15 days, right? Half a month. So if 24 hours lasts for 12 months, then 1 hour lasts for half a month. Which means if when you watch this match, when you watch this 1 hour match on earth, this match, live match, will last literally for half a month. So what does it mean to watch a match lasting for half a month? It means, again, it is not that, for them anything is changing. You're watching the same regular match, but imagine you made a recording of 1 hour, and now you're trying to watch that 1 hour match recording across a period of 15 days, half a month. So what do you have to do that? You have to slow down the speed of your recording. Only when you slow down the speed of your, when you make it into a slow motion game, when you make it into a slow-mo, right? That is when you can experience their reality. So literally, if you were to look at Indraloka or or Swargalokas directly, things will look extremely slow. Like imagine 15 days of simple 1 hour matches you're observing. So you'll never miss an action. You can actually go to work, come back and see what is happening, and again go to bed. Next morning you wake up, again see, okay, who got the ball. So you'll never ever miss any action. That is what happens in a slow motion match there, right? So now let's raise the stakes. So I hope you all are clear with this. So basically what we understood here is that because of this difference in the Kala Chakras, right? So what happens is their time, when we are observing them, it looks extremely slow. Therefore, it looks like a slow motion. Now, we try to understand some activity. Let's take again a football match, which is happening in Satyaloka. Again, you are watching their 1 hour match, right? So let's see what happens if you watch their 1 hour match on Earth. How does it look like? Remember, if 1/10 of a second is 1 year, then 1 second is 10 years, which means 1 minute is 60 times that. That makes it 600 years, which means 1 hour ends up becoming 36,000 years. Literally, that one football match will last for 36,000 years. So what will you call that? At least earlier it was slow motion, but what will you call this? I mean, what do you mean by 36,000 years match? You can watch that match. Your next generation can watch that match. Your kids can watch that match. Your grandkids can watch that match. Your great grandkids can watch the match. Your great, and it can go on and on. Literally, so many generations of your family can still watch that match. But while you are watching, it may look as if like it is almost static. It may look almost static, but it is not exactly static, but it looks almost like it is not moving, right? So things are slowing down. Now let's try to raise the bar even further. When you raise the bar now, when you go straight to spiritual world now, right? Imagine now you're watching Krishna and Balaram play their football match, right? How would that look like on Earth? See, as you go higher and higher, things are slowing down, right? But now we have a very interesting problem here. Their one moment is whole of eternity on Earth, right? What does that mean? It means that literally, if this was almost static, so slow motion, almost static, if you just extrapolate that, this will look exactly static, non-moving. So literally from here, from earthly dimension, if I watch anything in the spiritual reality right now, it will look like exactly static, non-moving, right? Now imagine, what if I have some means by which I can project the spiritual reality on Earth? I can connect, like creating a portal or something by which I can connect the spiritual reality on Earth. I'm no more using this flat 2-dimensional screens, but I'm creating some kind of a 3-dimensional effect of a 3-dimensional way of looking at things. So if you were to have that kind of a means to do that, if you were to represent the spiritual world, do the live transmission of spiritual world here on Earth in a 3-dimensional way, what will it look like? It will look like something non-moving, like static 3-dimensional figures. So some of you might be guessing what I'm trying to talk about. So those static 3-dimensional figures which I'm trying to talk about, those are what we refer to as the deities. Or the Archa Vigraha. Archa Vigraha. Right? Archa Vigraha means those forms that we worship in all our altars, in all our mandirs, in all our temples, right? So understand, they are not just some static forms. It is just that at my level of perception, I am not able to see the movement in them, but rather just like how you saw Brahma, Indra, there is some movement happening, but it takes a lot of time for me to perceive that. But when it comes to spiritual reality, at my level of perception, we are not able to see them because of this whole barrier that time is creating, right? In fact, in the beginning of this discussion, remember I said that according to modern science, this barrier is something that is created due to speed or gravity, etc., etc. But in the Vedic science, in the yogic science, this barrier is consciousness. This barrier is our consciousness, our level of awareness, how spiritually aware we are, how much our consciousness has opened. Because it is said that this reality is all this multidimensional reality, it is existing together in one place. According to your level of consciousness, we tune into that level of reality. If you are humanly conscious, we can only see human level of reality. But if you are Indra conscious, then even while sitting here, you can actually tune into what is happening in the higher planetary system, what is happening in Swargaloka, in the heaven, and you can actually experience that and realize that. If you are Brahma conscious, then even while you are here, you will know what is happening in Brahmaloka, what is happening in Satyaloka. You can literally, through your consciousness, you can actually have a conversation with Brahmaji, get some deep Vedic insight on some subject matter, and you can present it to the people here, right? So that is what happens if you are Brahma conscious. But if you are Krishna conscious, then what happens? Even while living in this world, one can learn to see spiritual realities, not just see, experience those spiritual realities. And this is how powerful spirituality can be, right? When a practitioner, through the power of spirituality, when one is able to raise their level of consciousness, they literally transcend this barrier of time, and they're able to connect to higher dimensional realities. This is the experience that Krishna is talking about earlier, right? None of this is abstract. With this kind of spiritual practice, one can experience these things. There are such wonderful pastimes and stories. There's a very nice story about one acharya in our tradition, a great spiritual teacher in our tradition. His name is Raghunath Das Goswami. And Raghunath Das Goswami was such an austere saint that he would he would take one meal once every 3 days, and that meal also just comprised of just a small leaf cup full of buttermilk, liquid yogurt. That is all that he would have once every 3 days. And there's one time when he falls sick, they call this particular Ayurvedic doctor. This doctor, he inspects him and says, hey, this person is suffering from indigestion due to overeating. And everybody's puzzled. He barely eats. How can he overeat and have indigestion? So then he explains, actually, what happened? During my meditation, as I was chanting the holy names of Krishna, as I went into a deep meditative trance, I was able to experience the spiritual reality. And there in that spiritual reality, Krishna offered me sweet rice. And I ate that whole pot of sweet rice. And because of which my physical body now got affected. Right? That is the power of transcending time. Because what you experience in that zone, it affects even your own physical body. That is how at these advanced souls, or even the advanced yogis also, you might have heard that they end up living for 200 years, 300 years, 500 years, 1,000-year-old yogis. And some really advanced souls in the Vedic culture, there's a concept called as Charanjiva or Chirayu. Chirayu means they live for really long time. Like for example, Hanumanji is one such Charanjiva or Chirayu. It is said that such souls, they never experience this death. They remain of that same age forever, right? So how does it happen? Because they transcend that influence of time, literally their whole metabolism slows down. That is how a yogi is able to control one's metabolism, and they extend the duration of their life, right? So these are little deep concepts. But basically what we're trying to understand here is that how time acts as this invisible barrier across layers. Now we'll try to do a reverse analysis of the same experiment. Now what happened was we were trying to look up. Now what happens when somebody from up comes down? That will be of great interest for us. Imagine now Indra from his planet Swarga, planet number 9, decides to take, he decides to spend 1 year on Earth, right? Indra takes a break for 1 year, comes to earthly dimension, spends 1 whole year on Earth, and then goes back to his world. So how much time did Indra lose when he goes back? Remember, 1 Earth year is equal to 24 hours. So the time Indra lost is 24 hours. So 1 day of leave Indra has to apply in his world, in his office, and he can spend 1 year full vacation on Earth and go back, right? And things get even more amazing with Brahma. All Brahma has to do is just blink his eyes. 1/10 of a second. That's all it takes. That 1/10 of a second, he can go, he can experience the whole earthly reality for 1 whole year and then come back to his dimension of reality, right? But what about Krishna, right? What happens if Krishna from the spiritual world decides to come into this world? Then what happens, right? Again, let's extrapolate. 24 hours, 1/10 of a second, as things are going slower and slower and lower, right? So basically you have to divide with infinity. Anything upon infinity is 0. So literally what it means is Krishna loses no time. He loses 0 time if Krishna decides to come on Earth. So now think, what does it mean to lose no time? At least Indra, he was physically absent for 24 hours. Brahmaji was physically absent for at least at 1/10 of a second. But when Krishna comes, he's not absent. He's still there. And yet, he's still here in this world, right? He's present in his spiritual world and is also present in this material world. That is a concept of the omnipresence of the absolute truth, right? Now, this is how you can see, you can experience what it means. You can understand in this kind of an experiential way what it means. The concept of omnipresence of the Lord, it is not just some abstract mystical story, but if you understand how time operates, how this material energy operates, then we can factually understand it. So these are not just some abstract concepts. This Rajavidya being spoken of, this king of knowledge, it is not just some abstract intellectual concepts, but rather this is something that we can deeply internalize and understand these concepts. And therefore, now if you look back again in this text number 4 and 5, when Krishna is saying everything is me, in me, and yet he says everything is not in me. At one level, that Krishna in this material world, in his unmanifested form, who's running this whole show of this world, in him exists this entire, he's the support, he's a substrata, the foundation of this entire universe. Without him, this world cannot function. And at the same time, he's not missing from his world. He's still there in his eternal world, in his Goloka, in his spiritual world, enjoying his loving, sweet pastimes with his associates. That way, in him, the creation, he is not in this creation, right? Nothing is there in that Golok Krishna, but everything is there in this Krishna who's present in this world. This is the mystical yoga. Pashyame yogam aishwaram. The Aishwarya yoga, the Bhagavad Aishwarya Gyan that Krishna is talking about in this chapter, this is how powerful this is. That's why I said earlier, this is not just some mere random abstract philosophical concepts, but rather we can factually understand this, and through our spiritual practice, we can also transcend the influence of time, right? When we elevate our consciousness, when we open our consciousness or expand our awareness, we start accessing these higher dimensional realities. It is there for our access even right now. It's just that I'm limited by this veil of time, because of which I'm not able to transcend it and look beyond, right? And just to give a metaphor to this very, very abstract, seemingly abstract, but we understood this in a much more deeper way, of course, right? To explain this, Krishna is going to give a beautiful example to explain how he is present and still not present. So to comprehend that, Krishna gives the example of the sky. He explains, externally it looks like the sky is holding all the air which is in this planet. It seems like sky is some kind of a lid, right, which is holding all the air inside this container of the atmosphere, right? But if you take a rocket and start going higher and higher and higher, there never is a point where you will say, okay, this is where the sky began, this is the sky ends. It all looks like air everywhere, right? So just like how this wind, the air is under the influence of the sky, but at the same time, there is nothing called the sky which is actually holding that air together or controlling that air's presence. So Krishna gives the example of the sky holding the air, holding the wind, as an example to say, look how the sky is present and not present. Likewise, I am also present and not present in this creation. Right? So that is why, remember earlier I wrote the statement, Krishna is blank, Krishna is not blank. Krishna is matter, Krishna is not matter. In one of our previous Q&A also we discussed this. Krishna is life, the jiva, Krishna is also not the jiva. This is the inconceivable simultaneous oneness and difference philosophy which the Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu elaborated. And especially in this particular tradition, the Gaudiya tradition, we understand this aspect about how the simultaneous oneness and difference aspect with respect the role of the absolute truth with respect to this creation and everything in this creation, including ourselves, the jivas, the living entities also, there is a simultaneous oneness and difference aspect like that, right? And then he goes on to continue saying that what else, what is he doing with his mystical opulence? He says, oh Arjuna, at the end of this millennium, all material manifestations, they enter into my nature, and at the beginning of another millennium, by my potency, I again create them. So, and then he says, the whole cosmic order is under my will. It is automatically manifested again and again under my will. It is annihilated in the end. So in text number 7 and 8, in fact, if you remember chapter number 7, the flow of thought of chapter number 7 and the flow of thought of chapter number 9 are very, very similar, right? Just to draw parallels with them. So chapter 7 versus chapter 9, right? If you remember chapter number 9, in 9.1, Krishna emphasized on, hear about my glories. What I'm going to tell you is extremely confidential. Now hear about my glories. Similarly, in chapter number 7, first verse also, Tat Shunu. Shunu means hear my glories. So you will see the parallels about hearing Krishna's glories. Right? And then if you remember, in 7.4 and 5, Krishna spoke about earth, water, fire, air, ether, and then he spoke about the living entities. Basically, he spoke about matter, spirit, and controller, right? So very similarly, here in basically how Krishna is dealing with material energy, right? That is a concept that we saw in the beginning of the 7th chapter. Likewise, again, in 9.4 and 5, again we saw Krishna's interaction with matter or material energy, right? And then if you remember, after that we saw about how Krishna is a creator, and we saw the definition of God in the chapter: generator, operator, and destroyer, right? So likewise in chapter number 7, he spoke about, in 7.6 and 7.7, he spoke about how he is the creator, maintainer, and destroyer. Likewise, again, we draw parallels in 9.6 and 7. Again, he spoke about the generator, operator, and destroyer principle. Again, he repeats. So there are a lot of parallels that you will see even as the chapter progresses, right? Because in text number 7, he says of this chapter that yeah, in chapter in 8, in fact 7 and 8, he talks about this, how the whole cosmic order is under me, under my will it is automatically manifested again and again, and under my will it is annihilated at the end, like that. So he talks about, his interaction. And but at the same time, while we spoke about the definition of God, God, generator, operator and destroyer, and this is how the definition, the very definition of God is centered around this world. So it seems like the role of God is bound to this world, right? Because that's when we discuss, if there is no world, then there is no God. Somebody may say, what is God doing when there's no world? When he has no world to create, maintain, or destroy, does God have an identity beyond this world? Or is he completely bound to this world? So in this specific chapter, Krishna talks about himself. He says, O Arjuna, nachamasthani karmani nibaddhanti dhananjaya. All this work of creation, maintenance, and destruction, it does not bind me. I am ever detached from these material activities, seated as though neutral. And that is how we define the concept of absolute truth. Beyond the understanding of God, beyond this understanding of God, is the understanding of the absolute truth. And that absolute truth, Krishna is declaring, it is me, because all this work is not binding me. Indirectly saying, I am beyond even the conception of creation, maintenance, and destruction, or generator, operation, and destruction, right? That is the understanding of the absolute truth. And then he says, okay, if you are beyond, then how is it working? He says, this entire material nature is under my control. Maya dhakshena prakriti suyate sa characharam hetuna nena kauntaya jagat viparivartate. Right? He says, this entire material energy is working under my direction and producing all this moving, suyate sa chara achara, moving and non-moving living entities, and under its rule, the manifestation is created and annihilated again and again. So this whole world is going through its cycle. And Krishna, he, by his remote management, he is ensuring that this whole cycles of nature operate, the creation and destruction, all the cycles are operating. So that way he is remaining neutral. So that's why I said Krishna is in the creation, Krishna is also beyond the creation. And both the statements are true. And this is where you see all kinds of contradictions are resolved in the understanding of the absolute truth. And this is the, I feel many times in many world traditions, we have a very polarized view of God, as in like God or whatever, the higher truth is, he has to be only in the creation, right? That conception of God is what is called as the immanent God. Immanent means God in this creation. Many world traditions, especially many ancient traditions, they followed this understanding that, when at the time of creation, God dissolved into this world. He has become this world. He is this matter. So if you want to worship God, worship the mountains, worship the rivers, worship this is blah, 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 right? By worshipping nature, you are worshipping God. That is how you'll see in many, many ancient, many pagan traditions, etc. They had that kind of an understanding. And then the other extreme is, oh, God is so holy. God is so holy that he cannot be in this creation. He has to be transcendent to this creation. That is the concept of a transcendent God. Immanent God, and there's a transcendent God, right? Which means God has nothing to do with this creation. He is beyond it, right? But the Vedic understanding is, as we see here, God is both immanent and transcendent. The absolute truth understanding is beyond both the immanent and transcendent gods. He is both. And that supreme absolute truth, Krishna is saying, Maya Dhakshina. Maya means my. So Krishna is very clearly explaining that absolute truth is me, right? That's why this particular chapter, Krishna no more uses any indirect language, because he is presenting the deepest, highest truth about himself. That is why, again, I said, this is the most, the king of knowledge, Rajavidya knowledge, because we're talking about Krishna's understanding of the deep concepts of Krishna's divine position, his transcendental position, like that. So if indeed, if this was the case, right? So now, after describing all of this, Krishna talks about what are the different ways in which one can approach Krishna, right? So let's write that down. So from text number 11 through 25, Krishna will talk about different ways to approach him. Different ways to approach Krishna. Now, some are direct, some are indirect, and some are misdirected. So Krishna is going to talk about first the misdirected path. So there is the misdirected. Then there is an indirect path. And there is the direct path. Right? So what is the misdirected path? Krishna says, oh, because the moment you talk about concepts like omnipresence, etc., we extend our limited material logic, because a person who has a form, who has a physical body, can either be present here or can be present there. You cannot be in two places. So therefore, such people, they misunderstand. This is how their knowledge is misdirected, right? They think that, look, because actually that supreme absolute truth is impersonal. Only impersonal energy can pervade everywhere. A person with a form cannot be all pervading. They extend their material logic onto the Lord, and thereby they say, actually, the original absolute truth is impersonal. And that impersonal God, for the sake of becoming visible to us, accepts the modes of material nature and manifests before us in a form, right? And this kind of a philosophy is what is called as Maya Vada. So one of the misdirected philosophies is called as Maya Vada. If I were to literally translate, it says the theory of illusion. So what is this theory of illusion about? It talks about illusion at two levels. It talks about this world being one big gigantic illusion. There is no reality that exists, right? And the second thing that they talk about is the Lord's form is also a product of this worldly illusion. And Krishna is very, very heavy against that. He says, Avajananti ma mudha. Mudha means like a complete fool, right? Avajananti ma mudha manushim tanum ashrita. So they think fools deride me, mudhas deride me when I descend in human form, manusha tanum ashrita. It seems like when I come in this human or human-like form, right? They do not know my transcendental nature as a supreme Lord. Param bhavam ajananto. They don't know my param bhava. They don't know my higher nature, my transcendental nature, right? As I am the Mama Bhuta Maheshwara. I am actually that supreme Lord. I am that absolute truth, who is all pervading and who has a presence of omnipresence and omniscience. Once a person is omnipresent, automatically omniscience also automatically comes. It is me. So do not think just because I am appearing as if like I'm having a form, right? Just because I have a form, it doesn't limit me, right? So this is the understanding of the, So if you go back to our previous statement of Krishna is blank and Krishna is also blank, is not blank. So you can put the element of form there. Krishna has a form and yet Krishna doesn't have a form, meaning that Krishna has a spiritual form and he does not have a material form which is limited like yours and mine, so like that. So this is the misdirected way of approaching Krishna, right? And what happens to such people? Very, very heavy statement. Mogha asha, mogha karmana, mogha jnana vichetasa. Those who are thus bewildered are attracted by demoniac and atheistic views. In that diluted condition, their hopes for liberation, their fruitive activities, and their culture of knowledge are all defeated. So their karma, jnana, whatever practice that they may be doing, they may seem like spiritualists on the outside, But just because they are deriding the form of the Lord, because they are saying that the Lord's form also is an illusion, because they are misdirected in their approach to Krishna, such people will never achieve success. So the end result of a Mayavadi, right, is just spiritual failure. They will never achieve success. Why? Because of deriding, because of not understanding the reality about the Lord's form, like that. And so we can use another term for this. They are called as the Duratmas. Right? Duratma means wicked, or demoniac personality. Right? If these are Duratmas, then we also have another category who approach the Lord directly. They are called as a Mahatmas. Right? Maha Atma. Atma means the self or the soul. Mahatma means the great souls. So what are these? So we'll actually write the translation. Duratma here means wicked souls, or people with that wicked mentality, basically. Right? Mahatma here means great souls, or those who have really elevated their consciousness genuinely and are experiencing this higher understanding, or the proper understanding. And what is the characteristic of this great souls? He says, Mahatmanastu mam partha daivim prakriti mashita. What makes one a Mahatma is because they have taken shelter in the Lord's protection, the Lord's divine energy. Right? This is the mood of bhakti. This is the direct path. This is the path of loving devotion that this chapter is going to reveal a little later. Right? So at this point, it will be good to reveal what that Rajaguhya is. What is that great secret? Right? While we saw understanding, the proper understanding of Krishna's transcendental nature, especially the understanding of Krishna's mystical opulence, right? How he is running the show as God is fine. That we saw in the 7th chapter also. But understanding Krishna as an absolute truth, how he is and he is not simultaneously, how we can, these apparent contradictions can be resolved in understanding of Krishna. All of that is the divine, is the Raja Vidya, or the king of all knowledge. But once you understand that, once you understand this mystical understanding of Krishna, the mystical nature of Krishna, and when you try to approach Krishna directly by taking shelter of Lord in loving devotion, that process of loving devotion, this direct process, is the Rajaguhya, or the top secret of the Vedas. Why is it called a secret? Because this process of direct devotion is not spoken of often in the scriptures. Only great Mahatmas who have experienced that direct process of loving devotion, they have given it to others. And therefore, it is only by the mercy of these Mahatmas one can access this process of Bhakti Yoga, this process of direct Bhakti or Ananya Bhakti that this particular chapter is talking about. And what is and how do you identify such Mahatma? Right? He says, Satatam Kirtayanto Mam. They are always chanting. Satatam Kirtayanto Mam. Kirtana means singing, always chanting and singing. Right? The Lord's glories. Always they are constantly glorifying. Satam Kirtam Yatantasya Dirdhavrita. And not just in an ordinary way, but rather with great endeavor and determination, they're always chanting the Lord's glories. And Namastantasya Mam Nitya, they're always bowing down to the Lord, always chanting, always bowing down in respect, basically, to the Lord, and always worshipping. Right? So therefore, this title Mahatma is an extremely reserved word that cannot use it in a very random way. Right? So one has to have this characteristic, one who's always absorbed in Krishna, one is always worshipping Krishna, bowing down to Krishna, chanting his names, such a person is called as a Mahatma, and such a person can actually experience the Lord directly because they're experiencing the shelter of the Lord. An exact opposite of Mahatma is a Duratma, who derides the Lord's form, who ends up finally having a spiritual failure because of following this theory of illusion or this Mayavada understanding, like that. All right. We will continue the rest of this discussion tomorrow, where we'll talk about this indirect processes very briefly, and then we will elaborate more on this direct process, because Krishna wants to reveal to Arjuna this direct process as his friend and well-wisher. And as Krishna himself glorified Arjuna, you are not envious of me, therefore I will give you this topmost secret. I will give you this direct process. And the sweetness of the direct process is something that we will discover in tomorrow's discussion. So I'll very quickly summarize what we discussed in today's class. This Raja Vidya class, right? We began by understanding that how in this specific chapter, after having gone through the remembrance of Krishna through intellectual conviction and meditative absorption, now we are focusing on loving devotion. And for that, the first thing we try to understand is the Raja Vidya, the most confidential, the king of all this knowledge. And that was the knowledge about Lord's mystical powers. And what is the qualification to understand this Bhagavad Aishwarya Gyan? One should be non-envious of Krishna. And this knowledge, it is not just some information, it's not some abstract concept, but it's a direct experience. It's an experiential knowledge. One can understand this, right? And we understood through this whole concept of how time operates, and with this case study, we understood the concept of how Lord's mystical power of omnipresence and omniscience can be understood. And what will deepen that experience is, as we elevate our consciousness, one will be able to see these higher dimensional reality, one will be able to see Krishna in action. And that is what these great souls are able to do. Exalted acharyas like Srila Prabhupada, even though while they were living in this world, they were able to directly communicate, with Krishna in his spiritual world because of their higher state of consciousness, like that. And then finally, after going through this, we saw some parallels between chapter 7 and chapter 9, and these parallels are going to continue further as well. Krishna begins the ways to approach him. So there are three ways. There is the misdirected way, the indirected way, and the direct way. We saw what the misdirected way was, the philosophy of Mayavada, which basically derides the Lord's form, right? And we also saw that theory of illusion talks about Lord, not only Lord's form as an illusion, but even this world as an illusion. Then on the exact stark opposite to it is the direct path which the Mahatmas follow. Who are these Mahatmas? They take shelter of the Lord, and they're identified how they're constantly always worshipping the Lord, chanting names of Lord, going down before the Lord. And that sweet process of this direct loving devotional service is a science which we're going to discuss in our next session tomorrow. All right, let me stop our discussion here. Let's take up any questions or comments if anybody has from today's session. So the slightly complex session, if anybody felt the whole time example, right? So please ponder over this if needed. The recordings will be made available as well. So please ponder over that. And if you have any quick questions or comments about today's class, please feel free to share them now. Or if anybody wants to raise their hand, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please feel free to do that. Okay, I see a question here. Alokji, would you like to unmute yourself and ask the question?
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dhanvad Pranam.
Dhanvad, Prabhu.
This time theory was little complicated to understand. Can you give another examples also, like you given the example of a sky?
Right.
Sky is there because of which we find the air, it is holding the air. If we go out of the sky also, we can go. So can you give more examples so that we can understand this thing?
Okay. So here's another example about how Krishna is in the creation and still outside the creation. So the classical example of a pot, right? Consider a pot, and inside that pot you are cooking something. You're cooking khichdi, right? Now, You put all the ingredients of the khichdi. You take water, you take dal, you take the vegetables, you take all the spices, etc., etc. Right? And you take everything in that pot. But if you just leave the pot like that, the khichdi will not be cooked. There is the need for something else to enter into that pot. That is the fire. If the pot is not put on fire, the khichdi will never be cooked. But then, is the fire literally entering into the pot? No, it is the heat of that fire which is entering into the pot. So at one level, one will say that no, the fire is not in the pot. It is actually the heat which is in the pot. But also at another level, one will say actually there's no difference between heat and fire. So technically, the fire has entered the pot. Fire is one of the important ingredients in the cooking process. So this is how one can understand. With this is another example to say that how Krishna or Ishvara, he's present. The absolute truth is present in this world, but at the same time, he's aloof from this creation. Like some of you might have heard this famous Brahma Samhita prayer. Goloka eva nivasati akilatma bhutao. He's present in Goloka, but at the same time, he's also present in this world within the heart of every living entity as Paramatma, making sure that the show in this material world is going on. Right? So this is the understanding of this inconceivable, Krishna is and Krishna is not aspect. Right? I hope that example gives a little more clarity. Right? So basically, we discussed that whole concept of time to give some easy way of understanding concepts like omnipresence of the Lord. Right? Because many times we just think, oh, they're just some abstract concepts, how can somebody be there, here simultaneously? But if you understand how this time operates, even very difficult concepts like omnipresence and omniscience can be very nicely understood like that. Okay, let's see if there are any other questions or comments. We are almost running out of time. We have one last minute. If anybody wants to ask any other question. All right. Okay. So let's end today's session here then. Or if anybody has any questions, please feel free to tomorrow when we begin the session, you can post your questions in the beginning and we can take up those questions before we start the next session. So while today's session was about the Raja Vidya aspect, tomorrow we'll go into the inner secret, the top secret of Raja Guhya. And the process of Ananya Bhakti or pure devotion. What exactly does Krishna mean by that? And why is it the direct process? All those concepts we'll understand in tomorrow's class. All right, so let's end today's discussion with the concluding prayers. Joining your palms together. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunattu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So thank you all very much for joining us for today's session. So tomorrow we'll continue with chapter number 9 and we'll discuss this aspect. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.